across the UK.
This is BBC Radio 5 Live. 5 Live Breakfast.
Very good morning to you. It is Monday the 30th of November. 5 Live Breakfast. Nikki with us from 6:30 this morning. It's 6 minutes past 6 now. World leaders are meeting in Paris today to discuss a possible new global agreement on climate change. Demonstrations were held around the world at the weekend, demanding urgent action on the issue. In Paris itself, 200 demonstrators were arrested after clashes with the police. Now, the purpose of the conference is to try to come up with a solution to a problem that current commitments to cut greenhouse gas emissions won't stop the temperature of the planet rising above the limit already set by the UN. The UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon says that current government's pledges to cut global warming emissions aren't enough, but he's positive that agreement can be reached.
At this time, I'm optimistic that we will be able to have an ambitious and robust universal climate change agreement. I think that all the stars are aligning in one direction.
Well, Dr. Paul Williams is a climate scientist at the University of Reading and was an expert reviewer of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report. Good morning.
Good morning, Rachel.
Let's just step back, first of all, and can you tell us where we are currently in terms of the world's temperature and how close are we getting to dangerous levels?
Yeah, well, it looks very likely that this year we'll be exceeding the 1 degree worth of global warming compared to pre-industrial times. So that means there's been a warming of 1 degree since about 1850. Another landmark that we're reaching this year or next year is that the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, those levels are exceeding 400 units. And the context for that is that the background level 150 years ago was 280 units. So we're seeing quite a large increase both in the carbon dioxide and correspondingly as a consequence in the temperature and the warming as well. And
it's 2 degrees above pre-industrial levels. That's the really worrying mark, isn't it?
Well, yes. To put some context, there is a treaty called the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, which goes back to 1992. And the objective of that treaty is to stabilise greenhouse gas levels at concentrations that would prevent what it calls dangerous climate change. And we now have international consensus that would be 2 degrees worth of warming. The problem with this treaty is that although it's full of good intentions and it's been ratified by just about every nation on the planet, the problem is that it sets no legally binding limits on greenhouse gas emissions and there are no enforcement mechanisms. So if you like, the treaty gives us the diagnosis, but it doesn't give us a prescription. So the plan and the hope for this week and next week, the meeting in Paris, is to achieve legally binding commitments on countries' CO2 emissions.
And what kind of changes would that require individual countries to make in order to meet those emissions?
Well, the hope is that there'll be a commitment to cut the CO2 emissions. So it's things like moving away from fossil fuel use, so moving away from burning coal, oil, gas and moving towards carbon-free sources of energy. And that means things like solar power, wind power, perhaps even nuclear power in the mix there as well.
That can't be the whole picture, though, surely.
Well, it's carbon dioxide that's causing the climate change. So right. It really does boil down to stopping the carbon dioxide emissions. That's the root cause of the problem.
And is there an issue then with, for example, developing countries which might have higher levels of industrial use than other countries, other more wealthy nations?
That's what makes these political negotiations very delicate and it's very hard to reach agreement. The reason I'm optimistic, though, if I can recall the problem that we had with the ozone layer a few decades ago, that was a problem that we managed to solve despite these kinds of delicate points. We realised that in the 1970s that the amount of ozone 20 to 30 kilometres up was being depleted. Ozone is important because it absorbs harmful ultraviolet light from the sun. We did the research and the atmospheric chemistry to figure out what was causing the ozone layer to be depleted. And it was these chemicals, CFCs, which are used as propellants in aerosol cans and coolants in refrigerators. All the nations of the world met up in Montreal in 1987 and agreed to a plan to phase out the production of CFCs. And we put the plan into action and it worked. And that just for me demonstrates what the human race can do when we put our minds to it. We really can solve these complicated environmental problems. It just takes a bit of willpower.
OK, thank you very much, Dr. Paul Williams from the University of Reading. Much more to come on this later on.